Hello, and welcome to a production from the Technology Training Team. This session is Essentials for Digital Learning. Today, during this session, you will find out more about the topics that you see on the left. Essentially, you'll get an introduction to digital learning, more about how accounts are accessed in Prince George's County, both students and teachers, some nuggets for designing lessons, how to manage student work, connecting with students, and then where these resources are located. As we introduce digital learning, we want you to recognize that the framework for teaching components that are visible in this presentation are listed for you. So as you begin to think about distance learning, here are a few fundamentals to keep in mind. Of course, it's very important to build culture in your classroom. Culture sets the tone for learning. It's important to honor and celebrate students' differences. Think about how each student is unique. Take some time to get to know them through activities, find out their names, what they're comfortable with. Don't forget to include how they pronounce and say their names as well. Make connections with your students by sharing some personal things about yourself to the extent that you're comfortable. It's also important to create norms collaboratively. When you think about creating norms, think ahead about the disruptions that may take place in your classroom and how to resolve them, but write them down in more kid friendly language. Build routines that are consistent in your classroom and set expectations for learning. It might even be important to sign a digital pledge, especially because you're spending quite a bit of time online. Don't forget that this is new for everyone, so give grace. Nothing will be perfect, and that includes for you and for your students. We are in the midst of a pandemic. There are people that are struggling with health crises. We also have quite a few disparities in our nation that have been highlighted for us. And students have different types of support at home. So it's important to keep these things in mind, not just for your students, but for you as well. The other piece to think about when you're considering digital learning is considering the goal of the learning first and the technology next. It's not ever important to think about, I know how to use Padlet, for example, in my classroom. How can I use it with my students? You really should think the opposite way. You should think more about what your learning goal is first. So, for example, I am really interested in collaborating with my students. What tools do I know about that will help me do that? And when you consider those things, remember to choose them strategically. Just because you know a lot of tools doesn't mean you have to use them all. Your students will need time to learn them, and you will need time to learn them as well. So keep that in mind. It's best practice to mix tools that allow your students to engage, but it's also important to remember that not everything has to be a tool. There could be opportunities for students to connect without technology, so include them in your learning opportunities. However, as you're considering tools, it's and considering the lesson design itself, it's important to think about what the students are doing with technology while they're learning, as well as what you're doing. For example, you want to ensure that your students aren't just passive learners and watching you with very little interaction. You want to give them opportunities to interact, as well as to use technology to create and build a deeper sense of learning in your environment. And as you're designing these activities as a teacher, you want to think about things that are similar. Are you choosing activities and technology that allow you to replace an existing practice that may not necessarily lend itself to the best instructional activity, or are you giving them opportunities to amplify or transform their learning? For example, you may have students who choose to write an essay. Of course, they could use Google Docs or any other processing tool in order to do this activity. But if you amplify it, you're giving them an opportunity to provide feedback to one another. So think about how you can amplify or even transform. And of course, the technology training team is here to help you with that. When you're selecting tools, though, it's important to remember not to select anything that you see. From our perspective, we have vetted and recommend certain tools based on data privacy, based on network compatibility, whether it's restricted by age, and what likely learning needs that you have. When you're choosing tools, students should never be asked to create their own account. particularly if student information is shared within. There are some times that third party tools share with advertisers, and that is not something that is legally or, of course, ethically correct. So you want to decide to choose tools that are recommended. Notice on the right hand side that you see that these are some likely learning needs for you to use specific tools. We also have an additional resource that gives you some more information about how to select the tools. Now, if you are a technology beginner, you're just starting out with your journey, there are a few tools that we might recommend for you, and you can see them here. As an intermediate or advanced learner, again, there are additional tools that you may choose, but again, you're going to choose strategically and not use them all. As you take a look at the different resources that we've provided, we've tried to give you some more background about those tools, as well as some recommendations for how to use them. So, as you return to this video and the resources that will be in an attachment or an attached presentation, please know that there are clickable links that you'll see, like this one, and on the remaining slides that you may go back and view as you view the presentation. Let's take some time to learn a bit more about Prince George's County accounts, devices, and procedures.
All students and staff receive Prince George's County Public Schools accounts. These accounts will give you and your students access to the district tools. There are some important distinctions between the two. For example, our staff email accounts usually have a period in between the first and last name. A few employee email addresses may not contain the period, but the vast majority will. Student accounts, however, will always have a dash between the first and last name. The amount of time you needed between changing passwords also varies between these two types of accounts. Students only need to change their password once a year, but you will need to change your password every 90 days. Be sure to review the rules when you change your password, as they could change. These account credentials will give you access to most of the sites and software that you need. In some cases, you may have to enter your credentials directly or connect via your school Gmail account. For students, the process is streamlined. They can log directly into Clever using their account credentials and gain direct access to the district-wide tools. Remember that data privacy is important. Always keep your credentials and student credentials secure. Student accounts do have some limitations with regard to privacy. They cannot send or receive communications outside of the PGCPS network, and they cannot chat or create meets. Remember to use district-approved tools to ensure that students are protected and their information remains private. You can get assistance with your school accounts through finding your school's password administrator. Now let's consider some of the aspects of the devices. Teachers will be issued a laptop computer that is tracked in our asset management system. You will electronically sign an equipment agreement and are responsible for the care and security of the device and any peripherals that come with it, like adapters or power cords. Students receive devices as well. This is based on their grade level. Keep in mind that during distance learning, students may be using personal devices at home. For students, we issue iPads to pre-K and kindergarten students and Chromebooks for grades 1 through 12. Again, students are limited and cannot install things on their PGCPS issued devices. Both groups will be able to access all the necessary district tools and software on the devices. Both teachers and students should report any issues immediately. Teachers can get assistance with device repair and software issues through the help desk. Additionally, you will have some staff in your building that can assist with technology concerns. You'll want to identify who your engagement and technology lead, and each school is assigned an IT technician as well as the T3 trainer. There are many administrative procedures that guide the work that we do. Some of these will be very important for you to read through and understand because they are relevant to distance learning. While these are not the only administrative procedures you will become familiar with, often referred to as APs, you will need to know the ones that you see here on the screen that are directly related to distance learning. The Information Technology Services Acceptable Usage Guidelines outlines accessing the network system and devices. Our Google Application Procedures includes the information for our G Suite accounts, both for students and for staff. The Remote Access Procedures outline how you can gain entry into our network system securely as needed. And of course, our Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook is critical for how student behavior is handled.
Now let's take a look at how to design lessons. When you're designing lessons, you want to begin those lessons with delivery in mind. Think about how you're going to actually deliver the content and those lessons to your students. In thinking about those, you're going to think about synchronous and asynchronous types of activities. You're going to think about flipped learning, individual assignments, and collaborative assignments. Now, those all are under one category, but it's very important that you think of those. For instance, when you think of synchronous types of activities, those are activities where students and teachers are interacting together and interacting at the same time. Very important to think about that. Those are your live times with your students. An example of that would be your live lessons or morning meetings. You want to keep in mind your asynchronous activities as well. Those asynchronous activities are times when students are learning on their own. So that may be an activity that they are given that is maybe some type of independent work, or they may be viewing a recording or reviewing a document. So think about that as an asynchronous type of activity. Those, again, are activities that they're doing on their own time, and the teacher and the student interact with the same content at a different time. You also want to keep in mind flipped learning design. This is something that is probably going to be really helpful to think about as you're designing your lessons. In the flipped learning design, you provide students information to look at and to review at a different time that you meet with them. So they're looking at the information on their own at a time that's separate from you. And then when you come together and you're face to face, that's when you have activities that assign greater meaning to what it is that the content that you're covering. For example, when you're doing the flipped learning on their own, you may have them do something that introduces a topic, that they may have something that introduces a concept and helps them access prior knowledge. And when you're having activities that are with the teachers, again, that's when you have deeper discussion of content, where you demonstrate a process with them and they demonstrate back. So you're modeling with them. So again, that time with the teacher is the time that most of the deeper knowledge is built. And we've got a video that's on this presentation. When you look at the presentation where it's loaded, again, you're looking at the recording, but you can also access this specific presentation, and you'll be able to click on that video and get a better understanding of flipped learnings. When you're considering, again, with your lessons, you want to consider creating assignments a specific way. You want to create those assignments keeping in mind that you want to have students demonstrate a simple use of technology. You know, everybody's got different levels of understanding with technology. So you want to keep that in mind when you're working with your students. Keep the technology use simple, and also provide very clear, concise, and specific directions. Teachers are always used to doing that, but there's an added layer to that when you're talking about technology. For example, when you're telling them to click a certain place, you might have to give them a specific example or a specific direction that may say, go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen. So think about that. And also think about the parents or caregivers who may be assisting those students. So you want to keep that in mind to make sure that you're giving specific directions. You want to create activities that allow flexibility and choice. Just because we're teaching a different way doesn't mean we don't want to incorporate those types of ideas that allow students to have choice in how they complete an activity. And we'll show a couple of templates that are going to be available to you when you click on this presentation on our resource page. So you also want to allow multiple ways to access the content and multiple ways to show learning. Remember, we're not in the classroom, but we still have to differentiate our instruction. We want to make sure that all of our learning styles are addressed when we're designing our lessons. So students who need to see something visual, you want to make sure you provide that that information for them, or that stimulus, so they can learn the way that fits them best. All right. Additionally, when you're thinking about designing your lessons, you want to think about whether they are individual activities or collaborative activities. And that really comes into play when you're doing that flipped learning or flipped learning design. And when you're doing rotations, you may be doing rotations where you're having live lessons with one group of students, and then you want to give them another type of assignment to do on their own. So this is where that comes into play. Your individual assignments could be something that you deliver in Google Classroom, where when you're creating an assignment for the students, you create a copy for each student. And that allows that student to respond and work individually on that document. You can also think about an individual type of activity, individual response, when they're doing a Flipgrid response, or they're researching a topic that was introduced in your flipped learning or through your video recording. Also, you want to think about your collaborative types of activities. And just so you know, those collaborative activities can be also created in Google Classroom, where a student can, you can create a document and a student can edit that file. You can have groups assigned to edit a specific file. You can also create a Google Slides document where students can edit and work collaboratively on a presentation. You can also use Padlet to have a type of discussion or to frame your discussion that you're going to have later and work with the teacher, work with on the with the students. So you can use something like Padlet for that. So students are working collaboratively. They'll see the responses that everybody has and they can have discussion. But that's something you can also revisit when you meet with them again for your teacher interaction time. You can also have them work collaboratively when they're doing a visual biography using Spark, Adobe Spark.
Once you think about how you're going to design your lesson, whether it's based on synchronous or asynchronous activities, and once you begin thinking about the types of activities that you're going to have in your classroom, whether they are individual or collaborative, then you want to begin thinking about the tools. When you're planning to deliver your lesson, this is just a reminder that all of your tools should be, as mentioned earlier, district approved tools. You also want to keep in mind that you're using age appropriate tools for your students. We want to eliminate any frustration the students will have or anything that might interrupt their learning. As you begin looking at tools and creating activities, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes you can use what you already have and give a little spin to it and make it more accessible by converting it into an online document. When you access this presentation, you will notice that you'll be able to click on the links on this particular screen. On this slide in the presentation, you will have at your fingertips templates available for you to use in instruction. Ultimately, again, remember the goal of our instruction is to focus on the strategy and the content, and then to use the tool or the template to supplement that.
Now that you've designed your lessons, you need to consider how you will help you and your students manage all the work. There are two important tools that you can use to help with this. They are Google Classroom and Clever. Let's take a closer look at each one. Google Classroom is the main place where your students' digital work will happen. Specifically, this is the place where you will communicate with your students and eventually where your students can communicate with each other. This is where you can share resources with your students. And most importantly, this is where you will create, assign, and collect the work students are expected to engage with. It's also the place where students should go every day to access their work and turn in their work. Now that you know what you'll do in Google Classroom, it's important to consider how you will organize your Google Classroom. Topics are a great way to organize assignments and materials into an easy-to-find way. There are a few options for how you might choose to organize your classroom, and that varies based on your content area or the age of your students. For example, in a secondary classroom, you may choose to organize by unit. You may also choose to organize your content based on week or assignment type. In an elementary classroom, it may be helpful to organize by subject, such as reading, math, or social studies. When you revisit this presentation, feel free to click on any of these images to see a sample classroom in a larger view. Now that your classroom is set up and organized, you'll need to consider how you will use the stream. The stream is a place where you can communicate with your students. You can choose to post announcements only, or you can choose to post announcements as well as classwork notifications if you think this will help your students stay more organized. Additionally, you can choose who can post to the stream. At the beginning, it's best to have only teachers posting, but eventually you may allow students to comment on your posts, and later on, you may even give students the ability to create their own posts and comment on each other's. While you're in Classroom, it's important to consider a few other tips. For example, we've already talked about topics, but one important topic that you may want to create and keep at the top of your classroom is for resources. And this is a great place to keep things that students may need to access on a regular basis. Also, make sure to give each assignment a due date and to put it into the correct topic. This will help students make sure to stay on top of the work that's due. Another way to help them stay on top of what's expected is to create a week at a glance. This helps students plan their day as well as their time to know what they need to turn in and what they need to work on. Finally, don't forget to return student work with feedback. When they can't see you on a regular basis, it's really important that they still get an idea of how they're doing, how they can improve, and any other information you need to share with them. And also, teach them to use private comments that are available on each assignment as a way to communicate with you. This could be a way to ask questions about an assignment or to tell you something that they struggled with, or as another way for you to provide feedback to them. The other tool that you and your students will be using on a regular basis is Clever. Clever is PGCPS's digital portal that provides students and teachers secure access to things like our instructional applications. And again, these have been approved and vetted to make sure they are safe and secure for our students. It's also the place where you will access your digital textbooks. The textbooks that you have access to will vary based on the courses that you teach. You will also find shortcuts to frequently used district websites. In addition to the district tools, as a teacher, you can create a teacher page to organize and customize what resources you want your students to have access to. As we mentioned earlier, only use the tools available to you on Clever's district page, as there are tools that have been approved. Now that you know what Clever is, you can access it at clever.pgcps.org. And if you'd like to see Clever from a student's perspective, you can revisit this presentation and watch the video.
Connecting with students. When connecting with students, first we need to build relationships. It helps them feel more connected and supported, which makes them engage and actively participate in learning. Here are 5 tips that can help gauge your students. Routine. Create a routine for your students and make sure they are clear and simple expectations. Sharing. Share information about yourself. Let students get to know you and get to know them. Acknowledging. Let students know that they are heard and are valued. Give them verbal and written feedback. Even when students are having a difficult time, acknowledge their frustration and help them talk through their situation. Make it engaging and fun. With distance learning, we cannot do lecture-style lessons. Allow students to be part of the learning, even from far away. And lastly, communicate with all stakeholders. Even though we are talking about ways to connect with students, we also need to build relationships with the parents, their family, some may be living with them and helping them at home, and also with the community as well. Now that we've shared some ways to build relationships, we want to share your ideas. So when you go back to the presentation, we have an option for you to share ideas for elementary school, middle school, or high school. Select your level and share some ways you can build relationships with your students, parents, and community. Tools that we can use to connect with students. Zoom is our district's recommended conferencing tool. It is how we will connect with our students during live lessons. And with Zoom, take advantage of its features to help you connect with your students. You can use host and participant video, where you can use your camera to show your face and facial expressions. You can use a lot of visuals for your students to see. You may even have an engaging activity where you can have students do a scavenger hunt around their room. Screen share. Sharing your screen with your students has infinite possibilities. You can use it to share a presentation, a video, and anything that you can have on your screen, you can show. Annotate. Use the annotate feature to draw and label items in your screen and even allow students to contribute as well. You can also use a whiteboard. A digital whiteboard can be used to draw out ideas and allow students to contribute as well. And lastly, using chat, polling, and nonverbal reactions to connect with students who do not feel comfortable speaking or using their microphone. As we discussed throughout this presentation, we discussed how Google tools can be used for lesson design and managing student work, but they can also be used to connect and build relationships with students. We will discuss more next in this presentation. Things to consider. As we navigate through our world's current situation, think about the following. Realistic expectations. Keep them simple, scaffold it for your students. These are unprecedented times. Remind yourself as well to have realistic expectations for yourself. Teacher burnout is real. Get to know your platforms. Practice, practice, practice. Test it with a colleague. Learn a few tools at a time. There are so many platforms and tools out there, it can be very overwhelming. Go for purpose, not bells and whistles. And understand your learners. Consider if your students are special ed, ESOL, have a 504 plan, their learning styles. Either they're auditory, visual, or kinesthetic learners. Also consider student interests. What do they like? What's the hip thing nowadays? And lastly, to understand your learners, think about their environment. Get to know what kind of environment they are in. Another thing to consider is how you will support your students. Think about how and when you will help them. How will students let you know they need help? You can create a Google form for students to fill out and let you know what they need help in, or schedule a time you can help during virtual office hours. Use appointment slots in Google Calendar for students to sign up for a time to meet one-to-one. Or you can use private comments in Google Classroom on specific assignments they need help in. You can also try to grow your professional learning community, also known as PLC. Teaching is not a silo. Get to know your colleagues, your grade level team, your content department chairs, ILTs, mentors, your entire school community. You can also join or follow social media. There are several Facebook groups that you can look up that interest you, and others are contributing information and ideas that you can use for your classroom. You can also use Instagram and Twitter or any other educational tool accounts to follow. You can follow us, T3, at T3PGCPS, and also consider following Google for Education or the G Teacher podcast. We even have Twitter chats or follow hashtags on different social media. Some examples are #EDU, #EdTech, and #distance learning. Or any topic you could think of, you can search with a hashtag. Tips and templates. We have provided you with 2 types of templates and tips, one for setting the stage and some activities to connect. When you refer back to this presentation, you can take a look at the different tips and templates we have provided for you. One example we have here is Zoom expectations. When you click on it, some of these links may have a pop-up where it says, make a copy. When you click on it, go ahead and click the blue Make a Copy button and make sure you're signed onto your PGCPS account. After it loads, it will have your own copy of the file that you can edit and use the way you want. These are examples of Zoom expectations you can use for Zoom, Google Meet, and you even have an option for Bitmojis, or if you're not into that, there's an option for emojis as well. Other examples is possibly using a phone app where you can recreate the experience of phone app using Google Slides as a one-stop shop of information for your students and parents. We even have available as well as a syllabus that you can create in Google Drawings to create an infographic on your class syllabus. We also have a link on more information on creating Bitmoji Classroom. For activities to connect, we also have Google Drawing, Google Forms, and a Jamboard that you can have a copy of for your own to get to know your students. We have an All About Me activity, a social emotional learning morning check-in, and a Guess Who activity. We even provided a topic for you if you're interested in using Flipgrid, where students can introduce themselves to you.
Now that you have heard about the essential components for digital learning, let's take a look to see where we can find existing resources throughout the district. As we explore this section, know the links are available within the presentation. Prince George's County Public Schools has a number of resources that will be helpful to you this school year. First is our district's reopening plan. This plan contains the latest information for our teachers and families about reopening procedures. When looking for resources to support the content you are teaching, you should visit the curriculum website. Here you will find the curriculum framework guides for all content areas and grade levels. These documents provide guidance on the standards, instructional strategies, and curriculum materials. The Continuity of Learning site provides instructional focused documents to help our students bridge learning that occurred during the 4th quarter of their previous grade level with the content that they will be receiving during the 1st quarter of this year. The staff portal is a one-stop shop to access to applications and resources used throughout the district. You will use this portal to gain access to our student information system, curriculum guides, professional development opportunities, and more. Watch the video in the presentation to learn more about the staff portal. We have a few places you can go for technology support. First is our Instructional Technology Support website. On our website, you will find resources on how to integrate technology into instruction, as well as webinar recordings to support you as you implement new tools. The SchoolMax support page of the T3 website has everything you will need to know about attendance and grades. If you need technical support, you will want to use the link provided to submit a help desk ticket. Lastly, if you are looking for resources, technology resources for families, visit our family support section. There are also people that can support you with the use of technology. The The engagement and technology lead is a staff member at your school that can support you with identifying the best tools to meet your instructional goals. The built-in technician can support you when you run into technical problems. And then the T3 trainer, that's our office, is a central office staff member that can support you with the technology professional development and instructional strategies for implementing technology. View the T3 trainer link to find your trainer that's assigned to your school. Now let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned in this session. Set expectations for learning. Remember to build a culture by setting collaborative norms. Reward positives and consider consequences for misbehavior, but always remember to give grace. Know what's accessible by students and staff. Know devices and tools, where you can locate them. Design engaging lessons. Think about what students are doing and what are you doing when designing those synchronous and asynchronous lessons. Choose your resources strategically and organize efficiently. Use tools like Clever and Classroom consistently so that the students know where to go and they know what to do when they're there and how to accomplish their task. Remember, you want to make your selections based on your goal and not the tool. Make connections and build relationships. Think about how you might meet the differing needs of all of your learners and continue to build those relationships throughout the school year. And lastly, know where to go for help. Know the websites for curriculum and reopening and who the people are that you can contact for additional help. Think about the components for digital learning and the tips discussed during this session. How will you implement these areas in your classroom? Share with us by leaving a response on Flipgrid. The link for the Flipgrid can be accessed through our presentation. As you start this year, remember, self-care is important. Take care of yourself. And taking care of yourself helps you to be the best version of yourself for the people around you. Find teachers you can learn from. They may be your teammates, they may be teachers in the district, or teachers that you connect with online. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Your colleagues, administrators, and central office staff are all here to support you. As we close this session, we hope that you will stay connected to us using the methods listed. Please view the photos and names to see the presenters of this session from the technology training team. We thank you for joining us for the Essential for Digital Learning recording. For more technology training team videos, please visit our website.